These Apple-style animations have been going absolutely viral all over Instagram, and for good reason. They combine buttery smooth transitions, cartoony realism, and high-level design principles into something that looks simple but is incredibly complex to pull off. Now here's the thing. Learning this editing style will not only make you a better designer and animator, it'll separate you from 99% of the video editors. That's why in this 60-minute masterclass, I'm gonna walk you through the entire process of creating this Apple-style animation completely from scratch. First, we're gonna start off with a clean UI animation and transition into this modern button. Then, we're gonna create an interactive stack of UI and transition into this motion design section with a very clean click at the end, to finally transition into this clean 3D scene with a smooth rotation that transitions into a fade out at the end. And the best part, I'm gonna show you every single step inside of After Effects so that you can follow along and create this exact same animation even if you've never made anything this complex before. And if you're serious about mastering editing videos like these and making your first $1,000 per month as a video editor, then check out Ultimate Editors, the link is down below. Without further ado, let's dive right in. If you guys want the project files and assets, the link is also down below. Alright ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and dive right into the animation. The first thing we need to keep in mind for this specific animation style is that we always need to remember what our scene is like and the elements which are inside of it. I'm back here inside of After Effects. The first thing I'm going to do is create a new composition. So I'm going to right click and add in a new solid layer. Then I'm going to add in the gradient ramp effect. Now set the ramp shape to radial ramp, and set the start of the ramp to the center of the screen and the end of the ramp to the edge of the screen. We're going to go with a start color of a light gray and an end color of a pure black. Let's first get started on the placeholder for this entire UI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add in a shape layer, and I'm going to be using my rectangle mask to just draw out this big rectangle across the screen, kind of like this. Now let's make sure to delete the stroke. And we're going to go down to rectangle path and just increase the roundness until we have a relatively round UI shape. Now we're going to need to color this, and I'm going to make a very cool coloring effect by first of all adding in the 4-color gradient. Now let's go ahead and place all these points on the edges. I'm going to place one point up here, and then I'm going to place the second point like down over here. I'm going to place the third point up here and the fourth point down in this corner. We're going to set the point number 1 to a very dark black color and use the eyedropper tool to make all of them black. Then we're just going to change color 3 to a very dark purple, and we're also going to change color 2 to a slightly lighter purple. And we get this very cool UI placeholder. All right, let's get to work on the button that holds our text in the top left. So we're going to right click and also add in another shape layer. Then using our rectangle this time, we're going to draw out a rectangle like so. Now we're going to delete this stroke, go down to rectangle path and just increase the roundness until we have a relatively round button. Let's go ahead and add in the 4-color gradient. Let's add the points to the edges as usual. And then we're just going to set point 1 to a really bright white. Then point 2, we're going to make it this grayish purple. Point 3, let's make it a darker purple. And point 4 is going to be a pink color. Increase the blend to get a nice button. I'm actually going to change the white color to a darker purple. Now to take this button a step further, we're going to be adding in our light sweep effect. And this time we're going to be setting the center to the center of the button, creating an angle so that the light sweep hits on the corner. And let's go ahead and increase the width until the light sweep is pretty big, and then just drop the intensity to 0. Finally, let's go ahead and increase the edge thickness and just drop the edge intensity until it's barely noticeable. Now we have a button, so let's go ahead and add some text to it. The first thing I got to do is right click and add in a new text layer. And for this button, I'm just going to write out purchase. Now let's go ahead and double click and make sure we're using a bold font. I'm personally using the Nexa font, and then we're going to click on S for scale and just kind of scale it up until it fits the button pretty nicely. And now to just blend this into the button a bit more, using a perfect white is just too much, so we're going to be using a slightly grayer white to kind of blend it in. Now we're just going to go ahead and parent this purchase text to the shape layer under it, and just move the shape layer to the top left of our shape. One thing to keep in mind is you do have to move the points of the color gradient with it. And I'm going to go ahead and scale this thing down just down to 55. So the next step is the text, which is in the top right, which is very easy. I'm going to right click and add in a new text layer. And here I'm going to need to type out a pretty long sentence. Now, once we do have our long sentence, let's make sure we are using the thin font. Now we're just going to go ahead and scale it down a little bit. And let's go ahead and try and fit it in the top right of our scene. Now let's go ahead and add in the price tag in the bottom left. So to do this, we're also going to add in another text layer. This time we're going to write out a price tag, and we're just going to make sure we're using the bold font. Now let's scale this price pretty big, and let's go ahead and place it in the bottom left of the animation. And I'm also going to make sure that the anchor point's at the center. And we now need to stylize this color text. All we have to do is go down to our shape layer where we added in the color gradient, copy that color gradient, and just paste it on the 497 layer. Now we're just going to move these points accordingly. Now you're going to notice it's a very, very dark image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to color 1, and I'm just going to go with a very light purple instead. And I'm going to go to color 3, and I'm going to go with a very light pink. All right, now this 497 is too big, so we're going to go ahead and scale it down to 150 and just place it right under our button. Finally, we're going to need one more bio like this one up here. So we're going to select it and we're going to duplicate it. We're just going to bring it down and we're going to write out a different long sentence. And now we're just going to go ahead and make it slightly smaller as well. Place it right next to our price tag. And to sell the effect a bit more, we're going to change its opacity to something like 70%. Now, the last part of this UI is the long loading bar in the bottom. All we have to do is right click and add in a shape layer. Then we're going to select our pen tool, click somewhere around this area here. Then we're going to go to the right side and hold down Shift and just click anywhere on the right side. Now let's go ahead and go down to the straight line and change the stroke so that we can see it. Set the stroke to something like 8. All right, now we actually need to create the line. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in the 4 color gradient to this one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put my 0.1 on this side. Then I'm going to put 0.2 somewhere kind of like over here, and 0.3 somewhere over here, and 0.4 somewhere over here. So we're going to select these different points and start them with a purple. Then we're going to go to a pink. Then we're going to go to a very light pink and end them with a white. Now we're going to go down and we're going to set the line cap to a rounded cap to make sure we have rounded edges. And finally, to create our loading bar, we're actually going to add in the trim paths function. And then we're just going to go ahead and decrease the end value until we could see it somewhere around there. Select that shape layer, duplicate it. And now that we have 2 lines on top of each other, we're going to go to the line that's below our main line. We're going to go into its trim paths and then just make it long one more time. Now the only difference is we're actually going to delete the 4 color gradient from that layer. And then just go down to stroke and make sure we select something like a very dark purple. All right, so with everything put together, let's go ahead and start animating everything so that it comes into the scene in a very, very nice way. So first up, let's get started on the text. We're going to go ahead and open up this text. And the first thing I'm going to do is click on my animate tool and add in the position function. Now the animator tool inside of After Effects is a bit more advanced. So if you guys don't understand this yet, this might be a bit difficult for you. I've got full courses like covering everything that has to do with these complex functions inside of After Effects, inside of our brand new After Effects Masterclass in Ultimate Editors. So if you guys want access to that and 300 more masterclasses inside of Ultimate Editors, you could just click the link down below and you could check it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the Y position all the way down to here. Now when I open up my range selector and I move my end value all the way back, you guys can see that it pops back up. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keyframe the end and start it at 100%. Then I'm going to move something like 2 seconds in and have it come up to 0%. Well, we go down to advanced, and the first thing we could do is we could set the shape to a ramp up. Now we're going to set the units to an index. This way we can control more of the shape. And now we can actually set the end to 0 at the beginning. So we can actually click on this over here, click on property, and we can add something like the opacity property. And now if we drop the opacity all the way down, and we can add in another property, and this time we're going to add in the rotation property. And now we're just going to rotate them by something like 5 degrees. So we're going to go ahead and play around with the speed graph. We're just going to make sure that it actually starts slower and then speeds up at the end. And I really like this text animation. I think it's very, very smooth. So now that our text animation is complete, we want to basically animate the button coming into the screen. We're going to click on P and just kind of move over to like the 2-second mark, keyframe the position, move back, and just have it start all the way off the screen on the left side. So we're going to select this, move into our graph, and make sure we're using the value graph. We're going to select our position and click on this button here. And then we're going to select this X movement over here on the X axis and just click on F9 to smoothen it out. Now we're just going to make sure that it starts very quickly by bringing this thing back and then ends very slowly by bringing this thing back as well. Select our second keyframe and then just make sure that we bring this thing up like this. Now all that we have to do is move this back until we have a relatively smoother animation. It ends very, very roughly, so I'm basically just going to move a few frames back right before it ends, and I'm just going to add another keyframe. I just want to make sure that I smoothen it out something like this. Okay, now this being said, we have the movement with the overshoot. Now, how do we make it even more realistic with some cool rotations? All we got to do is click on R and keyframe our start rotation. First, I'm going to go to the keyframe over here at the end of the movement and move my end rotation to here. Then I'm going to move at the beginning, and I'm just going to make sure that it starts at something like 5 degrees. Let's actually add a bit more, maybe something like 7 degrees. That's a bit better. Let's go ahead and select both these keyframes and take them into our graph. Make sure you're using the value graph, and then we're going to select both of these and just click on F9. So we're going to select the rotation. We're going to select our first keyframe here. Make sure it starts quick by moving this back and ends slow by moving this thing back. Now we also do want to do the same thing again, and we do want to overshoot it. So we're going to select the second keyframe and we're going to move this back like so until it overshoots to around minus 0.5 degrees, as you guys can see here. It's still barely noticeable, so let's go ahead and make this even bigger. Let's bring it down to something like minus 3. And that looks like a much more realistic animation. The next one we could get started on is this text over here in the top right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select it and go and open it up. First up, let's go ahead and add in our position animator, and let's go down to the position and just change it all the way to the right side. Now, if we go to our range selector, keyframe the start over here, and then maybe move like 1 or 2 seconds in and just increase it all the way up. So we're just going to get this very rough kind of text write out animation. So instead, we're basically going to go down to our advanced and just set the shape to a ramp up. We're going to change the units to index, and then we're going to go to our first keyframe. Let's go ahead and make sure that the end is a 0. So we're going to go to our second keyframe and increase the start value all the way until we have a full text over here. So we're now going to need to select our text, click on S to scale it down, and just kind of move its position to the left a little bit. So the other thing that we notice is that it starts off quick and then slows down, which is definitely not good. So let's go ahead and select both these keyframes, bring it into our speed graph, click on F9, and just make sure it starts slow and then ends quick, like so. Now, once this looks good, we're going to just go ahead and click on our add button. This time we're going to be adding in the opacity property and dropping it down to 100%. Now, on top of this, we're actually going to add in another property, which is going to be the rotation. And we're just going to start them off at something like -10 degrees. And finally, to get that 3D effect, all we have to do is click on the add function, click on property, and this time click on scale. It's just scale them up. And now if we go back to our first keyframe, we could start them scaled up. Now 250 is too much, so we're actually going to just start them at something like 175. Now let's go ahead and start on the animation for the $497 text. Now, one thing that we could do is, since we've already created the text animation, we could literally just go down to the text animation we created and just select the animator 1, which is basically the animator that holds all of these properties, and just paste it on the 497's text. Now keep in mind, this is going to first of all place the keyframes in a different place. So let's move those keyframes back to the beginning. And also it's going to start it on the right side and move it to the left. In this case, I want to start it right below and move it to the top. So all I have to do is go ahead and open up my animator and go down to my position. And I'm just going to go back to the first keyframe and I'm going to set this to 0. Instead, I'm just going to drop the Y value down to something like here. We're going to go to our first value, which is a start, make sure it's 0. And then we're just going to go to our second keyframe and keep decreasing the start until the text starts to get affected. Now, once it does start to get affected, we're going to increase the start until we have a pretty straight text, which is actually going to be 40 instead of the 800 which we placed it at. And now we're going to select this and go into our value graph and make sure we click on F9 to reset it and just start it slightly slow and then speed it up at the end. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of this huge rotation that's happening in the beginning, so I'm going to change this to 5 degrees instead. And I also want to speed this up a bit more because it is pretty slow. Now, the final thing I'm going to do is add in that same animation to this text here. So I'm going to click on the text that we created earlier and also copy that animator one more time. And we're just going to apply it to this text down here. But just make sure to move those keyframes back to the beginning. Now, this being said, we now need to animate the line coming in. So let's go ahead and parent the foreground, which is the top layer, to the bottom layer. And then to animate the background coming in, it's going to be really easy. We just have to go down to our trim paths function. And then all we have to do is keyframe the end at 100% and move it over to like 2 seconds and then start it at 0%. Then we're going to select this and make it start quick and then slow down. Just select this trim paths. And now all that we have to do is basically apply the same trim paths effect to the shape layer on top of it. But this time we're going to keyframe the end at 67% at 2 seconds. And then we're going to go back and start it at 0% and also smoothen it out in the speed graph. Now, the final thing which we have not animated yet is the background. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select that shape layer, click on T and just keyframe the current opacity at 2 seconds. Move it back and drop it down to 0. This way it fades in with the animation. Now, as you guys notice, everything basically animates at the same time, which looks amazing, but isn't the most high quality way of putting this animation together. I'm going to have the text right next to it come in 1 second later. And then I'm also just going to make sure that the price starts with the button, but slightly more delayed. I'm going to have the text next to the price start at the end. Lastly, we're going to just make sure that these lines start at the end like that. And I'm also going to make sure that the loading line starts before our front line. Everything looks very good. Before we move into our next section, let's go and add some post-production to make this look better. The first thing I'm going to get started on is selecting my deep glow, and we're going to be just applying this to the shape layer behind our purchase text. Tone down the exposure to 0.5. The second thing we're going to do is also apply this to the purchase text, but just make sure that its exposure is 0.2, something very light. Now we're going to apply the deep glow effect to the $497, but this time we're going to set the exposure to 0.5. And lastly, we're going to add the deep glow effect to the top layer on the loading line. We're going to go down to the input and we're going to increase the threshold until only the white in this line gets a glow. And then we're just going to make the threshold smoother. And now we could tone down the exposure to 0.4. And this basically completes the first section of our entire animation. And now we're going to start moving these elements in a way where we could transition into the second section. Now, this being said, if you are finding any of this stuff difficult, it could just be that you don't know enough of After Effects, or it could just be that this style is very new to you. If you guys want full masterclasses and complete personalized coaching from me, you can check out Ultimate Editors. We've got 300+ courses that are super super in-depth, and we'll make sure to guide you guys step by step throughout every single animation. You can check it out, the link is down below. I'm gonna go ahead and select all of these layers and click on U to see all of the keyframes. For the text which says purchase inside of our button, we're just gonna go ahead and select it, and we're going to take this end keyframe and add another one over here, and then maybe move 2 seconds in, and then just drop it back down to 0. Then we're gonna take this into the speed graph, and then we're gonna make sure that it starts quick and then ends slow. Let's start animating every single element off the screen. First, let's start with the most basic one, the UI background. We're gonna select it, click on U, and let's just go ahead and start this animation somewhere around this point. Keyframe the current opacity, then move forward and just have it fade out like so. Now let's go ahead and continue doing this for the rest of the elements. We're gonna start on this text over here. I'm basically gonna go back over to here, click on P and keyframe the current position, click on T and keyframe the current opacity. Now if we click on U, we can see both those keyframes. I'm gonna start it somewhere around here. Then I'm gonna move over to this side, and I'm basically just gonna have it move over to the right side like that, and then just fade out like so. Now we need to select both of those keyframes, go into our value graphs, change this to the speed graph, and make sure we select both of these, click on F9, and make sure we start them very quick and slow them down a lot. The next thing I'm gonna also do is actually animate this white text over here off the screen by doing the same exact strategy. We're gonna keyframe the current position, and keyframe the current opacity, click on U, move forward, and we're also going to move it to the right side and also drop the opacity. Let's select those position animations and smoothen it out in the speed graph. Now for the 497 text, I'm gonna click on U to see my range selector keyframes. Let's keyframe the current number over here, move forward and drop it down to 0. Now finally, for the line animations, I'm gonna make this very simple. I'm just gonna select the bottom one, which controls both of these lines. Click on P, keyframe the position, click on T, keyframe the opacity. Then we're gonna move forward and we're just gonna have it move to the bottom and then just fade out. And if we select the movement animation and smoothen it out in the speed graph, then we're gonna need to select that other line again, keyframe that opacity, move forward again, and also drop it down to 0%. Now this being said, after creating all these animations, this is what we end up with. So I'm gonna basically select all of them and click on Ctrl+Shift+D and just chop them up. Now it's basically time to animate this button kind of moving into the middle of screen. So the first thing we're gonna get started with is the position movement. So let's go ahead and keyframe the X and Y value right over here. We're gonna go after our first set of keyframes over to the 7-second mark, and we're gonna move the X value back and Y value up to the top. And then we're just gonna move over to the 10-second mark and move this thing to the center of the screen on the X axis and to the center of the screen on the Y axis. We're gonna select the X value and go over into our value graph, and just make sure you're using the value graph. Now for our first keyframe over here, we're going to make sure that it starts off slow, as you guys can see. Then for the second one here, we're also going to end it slow as well. Now we're going to make sure it shoots out the other side relatively quickly and ends very slow. So we're going to bring this thing all the way back like that. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing to the Y value. We're going to select all of these keyframes and click on F9. Then select this frame over here, make sure that it ends slowly. And then we're going to start this thing relatively smoothly and just make sure that it ends very slowly. Now I do think this animation is way too long, so we're going to go ahead and go back out here, click on U to see it, and we're just going to drag it back to somewhere around here. Now let's go ahead and add a bit more to this. The first thing we're going to start with is the scale. So let's go ahead and click on S, keyframe the current scale over here. Then we're going to move over to the 7-second mark where it's slingshots, and we're basically just going to scale this thing down since we're about to scale it up. So we're going to bring this thing down to 35. And then we're going to go over to this mark over here, and we're just going to scale it up. Now we're also going to unlink our scale, and I'm just going to make it horizontally slightly bigger. So let's go ahead and select both of those scale keyframes and do the same thing one more time. Select all of them and click on F9. And once again, start it quick and then slow both of them down out once they get to the second keyframe. And then once we're going over to our third keyframe, we want all the peak of the movement to happen right in this phase over here. So we're going to just end all of these kind of like down here and just make sure that all of these are back over here where all the peak of the movement is supposed to happen. Now we're also going to bring those keyframes further in like this, because honestly, this is way too slow of an animation. Now we're going to bring this keyframe also back. Now one thing I noticed is that the slingshot is way too big. So I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to move my X position back to its original and my Y position back to its original, and the scale more like 40 instead of 35. Now one other issue that we're commonly seeing is that the scale is changing not according to the X and Y position. So let's go ahead and select all of those keyframes and bring them into the value graph. So we're going to move over to where the peak of the X and Y position is. Then we're going to select the scale, and we're basically just going to make sure that this thing peaks a bit earlier. Now we're also going to take this a step further and add some more rotation to it to make it more realistic. So we're going to quickly click on R, and we're going to keyframe the current rotation. And let's click on U. Let's just go ahead and start the rotation back here on our first keyframe. Then we're going to go to the second keyframe, which is where the slingshot happens, and we're going to rotate it back something like this. And then we're going to go to our last keyframe and rotate it back to 0 degrees. Now let's take this into the value graph. Let's just make sure that the first rotation starts off relatively quickly but ends very slow. And then for the second rotation, we're going to start it off slightly smoother and just end it very, very slowly. Now I'm also going to just overshoot it a little bit when it comes to this rotation here. And finally, I'm going to extend this back a little bit and overshoot it even further up, maybe 5 degrees. Add a keyframe for the movement right over here, and just make sure that the ending is very smooth, just like that. Now, if you notice, this movement is very robotic because it happens after everything has disappeared. So what we're going to do is we're going to select all these keyframes and just bring them back. Now, there's a few things that if you guys had a keen eye, you might have noticed. One of them is that now our gradient is in a different position. So let's go ahead and bring it to the same position. So we're going to select our layer, go back to these first keyframes we made, and I'm just going to basically keyframe the point and their position. Now I'm going to move forward to the end of it, and I'm just going to move these new points over to where their new position is supposed to be. And if we click on you guys can see them down over here. Finally, let's move back to the original blend and keyframe it. And since we're changing the size of our shape layer, we also need the blend to change with it. So we're going to increase the blend until it is relatively good. Now, one other thing we're going to notice is that these corners look very, very weird. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the first keyframe, and once again select this, and in our properties panel, go over to the roundness and keyframe the current roundness. Now we're going to move forward, and we're just going to drop the roundness until it's just something slightly different. The final thing we can do to make this transition just way smoother is we can actually go back to the background we've got. So we're going to keyframe the start color and end color, and move over to the end of the animation and just change the end color to a dark purple and change the start color to a grayish purple. And you end up with this smooth transition. Now here's the thing, guys. I'm going to take you out of the animations for just a moment here. If you're an editor who doesn't know how to make these animations, that's exactly why you're not getting paid. I've been mentioning Ultimate Editors all throughout this video, but what is Ultimate Editors? Well, Ultimate Editors is everything an editor ever needs. It's the complete program where I give you step-by-step training on Premiere Pro and After Effects in over 100 courses, as well as teach you 7 viral editing styles like the one you're watching right now, 200 courses on the Josh Leon editing style, Iman Gaji editing style, my editing style, and much more. We've got over 300 courses, full projects to download, plus weekly coaching from me personally. We've even been called the most up-to-date, efficient, and in-depth editing program out there today. How do we know? Well, our students are crushing it. Anas made his first $1,000 per month. These guys are about to hit $2,000 per month, and Ma crushed the $3,000 per month mark. And you could do the same in just 90 days if you start now. If you want everything, the 300 plus course training, the client systems, the viral editing styles, and the personal coaching from me, then click the link down below and check out Ultimate Editors now. You're already watching free masterclasses like this. Just imagine if you had access to 300 more just like this one. I'll leave a pop-up here where you can watch me break down everything we give you in Ultimate Editors if you want to learn more. Join Ultimate Editors today and let's build your editing career for real. And with this being said, let's get back to the video. Now in this next section, we've got 2 things that are going to happen. We're going to have 2 titles that are going to come up inside of the shape layer. And we're also going to have this stroke that kind of wraps around the shape layers outside. So let's go ahead and do that. The first thing I'm going to do is select this title we made earlier and duplicate it and just bring it over to this side now. Just make sure that it is not parented to anything. And we're also going to delete the keyframes for the animation out. Now, one thing I want to do is I want to highlight the editors inside of this. So check this out. Duplicate this layer. And then I'm going to go to our first one and I'm just going to type out the word join. I'm going to go to our second one and just type out the word here. For the first one, I'm going to make sure that we are using the thin font. And then for the second one, let's just keep it at the big bold font. Now let's select both of them and click on P. Let's just make sure that the first one's on the left and the second one's on the right. Now the main way I'm going to make these stand out is I'm going to go over to the here text and add in the 4 color gradient. Now I'm also going to place these colors on the edges of the text. So I'll place one up here, place one down here, place one up here, place one down here. Then I'm going to make the main color a very bright white, and the second color a very bright white, and the third color a very light purple, and the fourth color a very bright pink. And I'm also going to increase the blend like so. Now one thing we notice is that the background of this button is very, very bright, which is not something we want. So we're going to quickly change these colors. The way we're going to do this is we're going to go back onto our main layer, click on U, and if we notice, we keyframe the points of the gradient ramp and we move it with this animation. So while we're moving it, we're actually going to change its color as well. So we're going to go ahead and keyframe the colors over here on the beginning of our animation. And then we're going to move over to the end of the animation and just change these colors to a darker purple. We're going to change this one to a darkish purple, kind of like this. This one is pretty good, and this one just needs to be more gray. And finally, I'm going to go ahead and increase the intensity of the glow on this specific text. And lastly, let's just make sure that the word join starts before the word here starts. Now to create this cool stroke effect, we're no longer going to need any of these animations here because our animation is complete. So I'm basically going to cut this layer right here, and I'm going to click on U, and I'm just going to delete all these previous keyframes in our duplicate. Now what I'm going to do with this layer is I'm basically going to duplicate it, and we're going to go to the bottom duplicate and delete the 4 color gradient, the light sweep, and the deep glow. Then on the bottom duplicate, we're going to go into the contents of the rectangle and just delete the fill. And instead, we're going to add in a stroke, and we're going to change the stroke width to something like 5. Finally, let's just make sure to click on add and add in the trim paths function and add an animation for this. So we're going to start by keyframing the end starting at 0%, and then we're going to move forward a few seconds and end it at 100%. Let's go ahead and smoothen this out in the speed graph as well. And then to really sell this effect, we're basically going to be adding in a deep glow on the stroke alone and just toning down the exposure to 0.15. Right guys, so the next step is we want to basically duplicate a bunch of these so that we can make a very cool UI animation in the background. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm going to go ahead and select all of these guys and duplicate them right here and move them up to the top. Now let's go ahead and select these bottom layers over here and make them invisible. And now let's go ahead and parent this top text to the one under, the text to the shape layer, and the shape layer to the base shape layer. This way all of them are controlled by this shape layer down over here. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and scale these guys down so that they are very small. And for the next step, I'm just going to keyframe the Y position, move back and drop it down a little. Let's bring it over to the speed graph and let's make sure it starts quick and then slows down. At the same time, I'm keyframing my opacity at 100% at the end, moving back and starting it at 0%. Now opacity doesn't apply to all the parented layers, which means I'm going to have to apply these opacity keyframes to the rest of the layers. And once this is done, this is the nice pop-up animation we get. Now let's go ahead and select all these layers and duplicate them so that we can make a second duplicate. Since everything is controlled by this shape layer down here, I'm selecting both of these position keyframes and moving it, and this is going to move all of my animation to the top. Now I'm just going to duplicate this again, move the layers to the top, and do the same thing one more time. I'm just going to do this and spread them all out all over the page so that we have a bunch of these UI boxes all full of animations. Now this being said, they are way too close together, so I'm going to go ahead and spread them out just a little bit so we have some space in between. And now to make this whole thing much more realistic, I'm going to go ahead and offset all of these so that they all start after each other and we have a more realistic animation. Now to make this look even better, I'm also deleting all the deep glows on the text inside of all of the layers just to make them more natural. And now I'm going to select this first UI over here and change its color to a orange themed UI. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change color 1 for an orange, color 2 to an orange again, color 3 also to a reddish orange, and color 4 to a red. And the final thing I'm also going to be doing is selecting these points and realigning them, because now that we've moved all of our UI, the different points are at different positions. Now I'm also going to select the main text and change the main colors also to orange and red themed colors. I'm going to spend the next few minutes or so just doing this for the rest of these different UIs. I'm going to be choosing different colors, simple colors, some more complex colors, maybe some even combination of colors, just so that we have a whole page full of different colored UIs. Now I'm going to go into every single button and just change the words and the placement of the words using the anchor point, just so that we have a bunch of different buttons. There's no specific way to do this, and everyone can just do it the way that they want to. So just write out a bunch of different letters and a bunch of different words so that we end up with a bunch of different buttons. Alright, so now that our UI button pops in and all of these pop in behind it, we're basically just going to have this thing come in here, and then we're going to have it animate its way down to here and open up to the top. Then we're just going to basically make the rest of these interact with it. So let's go ahead and do that. Now let's first of all get started by parenting everything to the bottom layer so that everything is controlled by the bottom shape layer. And let's first go ahead and make it scale down. So we're going to quickly click on S, keyframe the scale. Then we basically just want it to scale down at around the 10-second mark to something that is the same size as the background UI. Now let's go ahead and quickly animate the position. So let's start by selecting it and clicking on P. Let's keyframe the UI position. Let's move forward until it is the same size. And then first up, we're just going to want it to go down to the bottom of the UIs. So right down to here. And we're going to have it land on top of the click here button over here. Let's start with our scale animation. Bring it over to the graph. Let's just make sure that they both start smooth and also end smoothly as well. Now the next step is taking care of that position animation. Let's bring this over into the graph as well. Let's select it and smoothen it out. Let's make sure that this one starts a bit earlier, offsets a little bit, and offsets on the second point. And if you guys notice, the scale is happening before the position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to here and I'm just going to speed up the movement animation just a bit faster so that it happens as it's scaling down. Now in the second animation, when it's basically hovering back up to the top, I'm going to make sure it starts very smoothly and also ends with a very nice offset. Now this obviously isn't enough, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the second one and just offset it a bunch more. Now that looks good and all, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this keyframe back a little bit, and then I'm also going to add in another keyframe here just to smoothen out this final movement because it is pretty rough. Now let's go ahead and play around with this animation to make it more realistic. First of all, let's start with the scale. So over at this point over here, I'm going to go ahead and scale it up to something like 85. And then we're going to select this, and inside of our value graph, we're just going to make sure that this is a smooth start and a smooth ending for both sides. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add some rotation to this specific layer over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the first keyframe over here where the position starts, and I'm going to click on R. Once we keyframe the rotation, we can click on U to see all of these keyframes, and I'm going to go over to the point where it slingshots to the bottom, and I'm going to start with just a nice and simple 5-degree rotation. Let's actually set it to 3 degrees, that might be better. Then we're going to move to the end, and we're just going to bring it back to 0 degrees. Now what this allows us to do is go ahead and select it, and we can actually add a lot more rotation inside of the value graph. So let's go ahead and start by F9. We're going to make sure it starts as the movement starts as well, and we're also going to offset it in the other direction too. Then right at the bottom, we're basically just going to have it start relatively quickly as well and end very, very slowly with a huge offset. Now the offset obviously isn't enough, so let's go ahead and drop it way more until we have a very good offset. Now the final thing that we're going to need to be doing is basically making sure that all of these layers interact with this layer coming down and going back up. So let's go ahead and quickly do that. We're basically going to go over to this layer over here, and we're going to start by keyframing the Y position and also the rotation. We're going to click on U, and we're going to basically move forward until the layer crosses, and once it crosses, we're basically going to move the Y position all the way down to the bottom, and we're also going to add a little tiny rotation. Now we can select both of these, and let's get started on the position keyframe. We're going to make sure that it starts quick and then slows down at the end, and just make sure that when it slows down at the end, it is a very, very steady slow pace. And then finally for the rotation, we're also going to make sure to smoothen it out, and this one also starts quick and then slows down at the end. Now let's go ahead and do this to the rest of these. So once we get to the second one over here, we're going to select that second one. We're going to click on P, keyframe the Y position, click on R, keyframe the orientation. Click on U, move forward, and then just drop it down to the bottom like this, and just add a little bit of a rotation like that. Now we're just going to go ahead and extend these keyframes, bring them both into our value graph. Make sure that Y movement starts quick and then slows down drastically at the end. And make sure that rotation starts quick and also slow down at the end. Now let's go ahead and do this to the rest of these layers over here. And now as this whole animation happens, one thing that we could do to smoothen this out and make it look so much better is also change the color of the background. So right around here, I'm also going to keyframe the current color as well, and move over to where the animation's happening, and probably just change it to a dark gray and dark black combination. Now right at the end of this, as this thing comes up and then starts to slide back down, I basically wanted to kind of slide down to the middle of the screen and take over so we could transition to the next animation. This thing at this point starts dropping down, so I'm going to continue that drop and go ahead and just move it somewhere to around the center of the screen, like this. Then we're going to click on S for the scale, and since the last keyframe is over here, we're also going to move forward once again, and also right at this point we're just going to have it scale up to take over the screen. Now this being said, the text is still on it, so what I need first is for the text to go away. So right around here, I'm going to select both of these text layers, I'm going to keyframe the current end, and then I'm going to take both of these first keyframes, and then I'm going to move forward to around here and just drop the end to 0. Now let's go ahead and take both of these into the value graph, just make sure that both of them start fast and then slow down. And lastly, let's go ahead and take the Y keyframes, and let's just go ahead and smoothen this out. So what I want to do over here is I want to slow down this movement right here, and I want to kind of build this thing up, and then this thing over here is going to just kind of build up over to here, and it's going to end relatively quickly. The only thing that's tripping us right now is the scale, so let's select the scale and make sure that it starts super slow like this and ends very fast. So this is by no means snappy or organic, so let's go ahead and fix that. First up, I basically need to bring these keyframes way closer. Let's select all these Y keyframes over here, and let's just make sure that this movement is very, very easy. And then right around this point, we're basically going to want to start the scale animation, and we're just going to make sure that it builds up over to here where it's still going to be the same, and then finally scales up over here. So now how do we make this animation more natural? Well, the first thing we could do is just have a bit of offset over here for the scale. So just make sure that it scales down first of all and then scales back up. And the second thing we could do is actually add in some rotation. So let's go ahead and do this. As this thing animates to the bottom like so, I'm going to basically want to add a little rotation like that. And then as it's scaling up, we're going to add a rotation the other direction. And let's just make sure that it offsets and just kind of jumps down like that. And over here, it also offsets and jumps up like that. So right after here, I basically no longer need any of these layers that are down here. So I could just select all of them like this and then just cut them off. I also no longer need my text by this point. So I could just select both of them and also cut them off. Instead, what I do need is I basically need a high quality background. And to do this, we're going to keyframe the current points and their position right over here before the animation. Then we're going to move forward after the animation, and we're going to place the points first of all on the edges, and finally we're going to make this a white background. By this point guys, you're 30 minutes into the masterclass, and let me ask you a question. How many new things are you learning so far? If you haven't yet checked out Ultimate Editors, what are you waiting for? Click the link down below. There's 300 plus more masterclasses just like this one waiting for you. Trust me, just check it out. Now the first thing that we're going to want over here in this section is this kind of box to pop up and then turn into a bouncing ball and then just elongate into a background. So let's go ahead and quickly get started on that. To do this, we're going to right click and we're going to add in a new shape layer. Now with this shape layer, I'm actually going to just draw out an even square like that and just make sure that we align it to the center. Now let's just go ahead and delete the stroke, add a light blue fill. Now as we control the roundness, we can basically turn it into a ball. So we're going to first start off the roundness at something like 16, 15. And now we're going to get started on creating the bounce animation. So we're first of all going to click on P and keyframe the current position. And this is going to be our end position, which is going to be at 15 seconds. Then we're going to move back and we're just going to make sure that it starts off the screen at the bottom. Now it's going to move up to our end position like so. Now I'm going to lift up the end position up like this and then just have it bounce back down to the bottom like this. Now after this, it's going to basically bounce back up to this point over here, which is the middle of the screen, which is where we continue the animation. Let's go ahead and select these and bring them into our value graph. And let's first start by separating the dimensions. Now let's go ahead and select all of these and click on F9 to smooth them out. We're going to start this movement relatively quick since this is the upburst right up here. And then we're going to make the peak very, very slow because this is where the peak is. Now we're going to make the first bounce very, very fast because a bounce is always fast. And we're going to do this by slowing them down like that. Now this whole animation looks pretty good, but it definitely needs to go on much faster. And to bring this thing to more life, we're going to click on S and unlink our scale and keyframe it. And check this out. Now we're going to basically stretch and squeeze this based on the speed. So over here, it is relatively fast. So right up to this point, I'm basically going to extend the Y scale. Now right over here, we reach our first peak. So we're going to drop this back down to 100. And then we slowly start dropping down again. So over here, we could basically extend this thing over to 110. And as we hit the floor right over here, we're going to shrink this back down to 100 and extend it horizontally to 120. And then right after we come back up, we're going to bring this back down to 100 and then bring the vertical value back up to 120. And then right over here, we can bring it back over to 100. Now we take all of this, bring it into our value graph. Let's select all of it and click on F9. Let's make sure we start it fast and then slow it down towards the end like this. And then we can also slow down the second movement over here as well. Now right at the peak, both of these need to be very, very short and they need to be very, very temporary. And now for the first time it bounces, I'm basically going to change its color. So right over here, it starts to hit the bounce. I'm going to go and select it, go over to my properties and keyframe the fill color. Let's go ahead and move it a few frames back. And as it's coming back up from the bounce, I'm going to change it to a darker purple. And then right over here, after it finishes the complete bounce, we're basically just going to go ahead and take this opportunity to scale it up into a full-size background. To do this, we're going to scale it horizontally around this much and vertically around this much. And to not get any weird roundness on the corners, we're going to go back here, keyframe the roundness, move back up front, and then just drop it down until it is barely noticeable. Now let's go ahead and select both of these keyframes and bring them into the value graph. Let's get started on the scale. We're going to just make sure that this thing starts fast and then slows down. And then at the end, we're going to extend both of these keyframes outwards like this. And then we're going to go back to around here, add a keyframe for both scales, and we're just going to go ahead and smoothen out the exit over here. And then basically as this thing is changing sizes like this, I'm going to keyframe the fill color one more time and go ahead and change it to this lightish gray. And now this is where we could get started on our third animation. Let's get started by adding in our logo, and we're just going to go ahead and scale it down until we can see it, and then adding in the roughen edges effect to create some rounded borders. We're going to increase the border size all the way and then just drop the fractal influence and increase the edge sharpness all the way. Now we could tone down the border so that we could get a smooth round corner. Now I want this thing to basically drop down from the top of the screen. So we're going to click on P, keyframe our current position. Let's first of all scale it down so that we can fit it into this, something like that. Let's just go ahead and start it over here on the left side where it's going to end up, and then on top of the screen. Then we're going to just move forward and just have it kind of drop down to here. We're also going to select this, move into our value graph, separate the dimensions, and then just smoothen out the entire movement. Now we're going to extend this a bit more, offshoot it a little bit more so it's even smoother. And right around here, I'm going to keyframe my Y position, and I'm going to just make sure that the ending is quick. Now we're also going to want some text to kind of come into the frame here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this original UI animation we made, and I'm going to duplicate this text that we made early on. Let's go ahead and bring it into this frame. Let's just make sure that its color is a black. Let's also set it to the bold font. Then we're going to write out Ultimate Editors, and we're going to scale this thing up slightly. Now I'm going to go ahead and select both of their position and just make sure that we place it over here on the right side of our logo. Now a black is too harsh, so we're going to go with a light gray. So right around this point, I'm going to add in the roughen edges effect. And I'm going to do the same thing by increasing the edge sharpness and decreasing the fractal influence. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keyframe the current border, and then just as it comes into frame, I'm going to go ahead and increase that until it just smoothens it out just a little bit. Now we're also going to be duplicating this and just moving its position down to the bottom. and I'm going to be writing out a big description. Now let's go ahead and double click on it and make sure we're using the light font for this one. And we're just going to go ahead and scale it down until it fits in. Place it on the left side over here. And now we're just going to offset them a little bit so that they both kind of come in after each other. Now both of them move from a position which is very, very far off. So for that reason, I'm going to go down to the animator and I'm just going to move the original position to something that is way closer. Now finally, for that download button at the end, we're going to go ahead and go back to the beginning, and we're basically just going to take the shape layer of this button that we made and the text on top of it and just duplicate it and bring it back over to our new scene. Now we're basically going to have to reset all of these keyframes. So let's select everything except the range selector animation on the text. Let's just go ahead and delete everything else. Now we're basically just going to set the colors of this box to a light gray, and inside we're going to write out the word buy, and finally we're going to change the color of the word inside to a light blue. Now let's actually go ahead and remove this deep glow, and let's make this blue a slightly lighter blue. Then we're going to change the color of the background to a slightly lighter gray as well, and also delete this light sweep effect. All right, now let's go ahead and animate this thing flying into the screen from the right side. First, let's click on P for position and place it in the bottom over here. This is going to be its end position. So for that reason, we're going to keyframe its X position over here. Move this X position over to something like there. Let's just make sure that we start it off of the screen to the right side. Now let's get this into our value graph, and let's make sure we select it and smooth it out. And let's also start this thing quick like so, and just offset it so that it jumps. Let's add another keyframe over here, and just make sure that this movement is just as smooth as possible. And then make sure that we offset this just a little bit and then smooth it back out over here. Now we're going to extend the second keyframe and just make sure that when it comes back, it is slower. Now, as this thing is coming into frame, we can also add in some rotation animation. So let's click on R for the rotation. And let's click on U, move forward, and just have the first keyframe be a -6 or 5 degree rotation. And then we're going to move to the end and just drop it back down to 0 degrees. And now for the rotation, let's go ahead and smoothen this out. Let's just make sure that it starts off with a big offset and ends with a huge offset. And the same thing on the other side. Let's make sure we toss this offset up pretty high, and the same thing goes for this down here. And then over here for the final offset, let's actually make sure that it is relatively big as well. And over here, we could just extend this thing out like that and go over to here, add another keyframe for the rotation, and then just make sure that it ends on a smooth note at the end like so. Now finally, right around here, we're basically going to want this thing to click and then create the cool circle animation that we want. And all we got to do this is first of all animate the click by selecting our shape layer, keyframing the current scale, moving slightly forward and just dropping it down to something like 40, and then bringing it back up to something like 45. Now, if we select this and go into our value graph and smooth it out, we can make sure that it starts off slow and has a slow click and also ends very slowly. Now, this is a very fast animation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend these keyframes very far apart. Now, since everything is going super slowly, so let's make sure that it first overshoots and then overshoots to the bottom and also overshoots to the top like so. Now, this point over here is definitely too harsh, so we can actually smooth this out and this should look good. Now, once this thing clicks, we can then begin our animation. And to create this whole circle animation, we're first going to get started by right clicking and adding in a shape layer. Now we're going to make sure that this shape layer is below our buy icon. And all that we're going to do is select our circle mask or ellipse tool, and we're just going to draw out a perfect circle behind the buy button. Now, this being said, we're also going to center that anchor point. For this specific circle, we're going to be deleting the stroke, and we're going to be changing the fill to something that we could see, so something like a dark gray for now. And we're just going to wait till that click happens. And as that click happens, we're basically going to start that circle. We're going to keyframe the current scale and start it at 0. And then we're going to move a few seconds later and just make sure that we end it at something very big enough to take over the rest of the screen. And now when we do this, we can basically smoothen it out in the speed graph, make sure it starts quick and then slows down towards the end. Now, this being said, I want to slowly transition into a dark blue background. So the first color that's going to be closest between white and dark blue is going to be light blue. So I'm going to first have a light blue circle come up, and I'm going to duplicate this and move it slightly forward. This way we have another circle come in, and this one is going to be slightly more blue. And we're going to do this one more time till we have another circle come in, and this one is going to be slightly even more blue. And now we're just going to make sure that we speed these up so they don't take up too much time. And the fourth circle, this is where we could get started on our background. We're going to start darkening the blues like this, and do a fifth circle and darken it even more, all the way until we end up with a very dark blue. Now, all of these are happening from behind our buy button. So this is where the buy button can fade out off of the screen. which is why we're going to basically keyframe its current Y position and its current rotation once again. Click on U to see both of these, move maybe 1 second or half a second forward, and basically just move it off of the screen to the bottom with a little bit of a rotation. Now we're going to select both of these, and inside of our value graph, once again, smoothen it out with a little offset in the beginning so that it launches itself up and then throws itself down. As for the rotation, let's just make sure that it starts quick and then ends slow. And also make sure that this happens right after the click. Now, once we get to this point where the final background has taken over, we can basically select all of these and cut all of them. And the only thing that we'll need to leave is that background. And we can also cut the rest of the layers. And finally, we're going to duplicate this background, and to actually make a very beautiful final background that we can use, we're going to finally add in the 4-color gradient here. And for this one, we're going to go with black edges, and then we're just going to make one of those colors a very dark blue and the other one a slightly lighter blue. And if we increase the blend, we'll end up with a very beautiful background. So far, guys, you've watched 45 minutes of this masterclass, and this is where you can make your judgment. If you found the last 45 minutes useful and have been learning so much, you're going to be mind blown by just how much value is inside of Ultimate Editors. Trust me, guys, we've built this program specifically for editors like you. And sorry if I'm pushing really hard on the calls to action, but I just know how useful this is for editors like you guys. So click the link down below when you can. And now, ladies and gentlemen, now that we got over up to this point where all of our backgrounds kind of come in and this final circle is actually our background, we can now basically extend this circle and get to work on the rest of our animations. The first thing I'm gonna need is my text popping up. So let's go ahead and add in a new text layer. And I'm first gonna start off with my Ultimate Editors text. First, let's go ahead and scale it in, center the anchor point, and let's just make sure that it is at the center of the screen. Now we're gonna stylize this specific text in a very cool way. So to do this, we're gonna basically right-click and add in a new shape layer. And then in the shape layer, I'm gonna draw out an ellipse tool right at the center of the text, like over here. You guys can see this is a very small circle over here. Just make sure that the center of the anchor point is there. Now we're going to just go into our shape layer, and we're not gonna be able to see this, but we're gonna need to delete the stroke, and we're just gonna add a bright blue fill. Now this being said, if I increase the scale, I just have a circle. But if I click on toggle switches and modes and I track matte the shape layer to the text, you guys can see that now inside of this circle, you basically have the reveal of the Ultimate Editor's text. And the circle basically only appears on the Ultimate Editor's text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a base circle over here, like so. And I'm going to change its color to something like a light blue. And then all I'm basically going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. And this thing is also track matted to the Ultimate Editor's text. And now if I shrink this thing down, you guys can see nothing actually happens unless I change the color of the circle. So what we're going to do is we're going to keyframe the scale at 0 and move that keyframe to the beginning. Then I'm going to move roughly like 2 seconds in, and I'm just going to scale this thing up really big. Let's go ahead and select both those keyframes. Let's bring it into the value graph and smoothen it out. Now all we're going to do is change the second fill to just a slightly lighter blue. And now I'm going to duplicate it and move this other circle again and make this one slightly lighter, and duplicate it again and move this other circle one more time, and finally make this last one even lighter. And we'll get this cool circle effect inside of Ultimate Editors. The final thing I'm going to do is parent this top layer to the one under it, the one under it to the circle under it, and the circle under it to the original shape layer. And finally, that original shape layer, we're going to parent it to the text. This way, everything basically just follows the text wherever it goes. Now, that being said, I will go ahead and create a quick pop-up animation for this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to somewhere like the 1 second mark, keyframe the current position, move back, and just go ahead and start it slightly lower, like so. Then I'm going to select these and go into our value graph. And we're just going to make sure that this thing starts quick and then slows down. All right, now the final trick is we're going to need to add in the echo effect to the text that we just made. And we're just going to increase the number of echoes to something like 4. And you guys can see this creates a very nice kind of outline behind our text like that. Now to add in our other text, we're just going to go ahead and right click and add in another new text layer. And these other two are just going to be regular white text. So I'm going to write out the word online. Let's just go ahead and scale it up until it's relatively the same size. And we're just going to change the fill to this kind of light white color. Finally, let's make sure the anchor point is at the center. Let's go ahead and move its position over to somewhere like the center over here. And let's also create that same pop-up effect. So this thing is going to be placed under our Ultimate Editor's text. So I'll keyframe the current position, move back, and have it start down below as usual. Let's make sure we speed this up in the speed graph. And we're also just going to go over here and copy the same echo effect and apply it to this text as well. Now all that we have to do is use our anchor point by clicking A to move this thing around. So what I'm going to do is select my text layer, go ahead and duplicate it. And on my duplicate, write out community. Now I could just click on A on both of them. This way I could change their anchor point and move the anchor point of the word community and the anchor point of the word online until they both fit on the same line. Now I want to make sure that Ultimate Editor starts first and then online and then community. Now after this whole text sequence is finished, I basically, right after all these circles kind of expand, I want it all to animate away. So to do this, I'm basically going to keyframe the same position animation here and then move forward and just going to animate it to the top. So let's go ahead and bring this also into our speed graph and just make sure that this one starts slow and then ends fast. Now as this thing gets to the end of its animation, we're going to click on T for the opacity. We're going to keyframe the current opacity, click on U, and then we're going to move forward to the end. Just make sure the opacity at the end is 0. So let's select both texts, click on P, keyframe their current position, move forward, and just have both of them move up to the top. Let's select both of these, bring them both into the speed graph. And also simultaneously, we're going to click on T, keyframe the opacity, click on U, and then basically move forward and have it end at 0%. Now the final part that I'm going to do is I'm basically going to delay these animations. So this first one's going to happen right over here. This second one's going to happen over here. And this third one's going to happen at the end. Let's go ahead and select all these layers and cut them right over here. And now we're going to begin our second text sequence. So right around this point is where the 3D model is going to come into the frame. So right as these are popping out, I'm basically going to select one of these white text, like let's say community. I'm going to move it forward over to here. I'm just going to have it kind of pop in over here. And I'm just going to write out, don't have a desktop /PC, and then I'm going to be using the anchor point to bring this thing over to the center. I'm also actually going to be scaling it down because right now it's pretty big. And now I'm also going to take these first few keyframes and I'm actually going to extend them a lot. And the echo, I believe, is way too harsh. It's definitely way too bright, that's for sure. So we could drop the starting intensity to 0.5 and that should be better. Another thing that I do notice is that if we increase the number of echoes, we have a smoother echo, and decrease the number of the decay to 0.7. Okay, I think 0.7 is too much. Let's do 0.85. And finally, to basically top this whole thing off, we could change the echo time to -0.010. And then finally, we have the final text that comes in. So here we're just going to write out, use a phone. And we're also just going to click on A for the anchor point and make sure it's at the center. And then finally, to make this whole thing special, I'm going to be deleting the word phone. And instead, I'm going to select all of these over here, which are basically the shape layer animations and that cool circle animation we did on the Ultimate Editor's text. Click on Ctrl D to duplicate it and just bring it to the top. And then we're just going to place it on top of this text over here. Now we're going to select the main text and change this to the word phone. And just make sure that we use the anchor point to place it in the center of the screen. Now, one thing we're going to need to do is go ahead and rearrange all these circles so that they are in the center of the new word, which is the word phone. To do this, all I have to do is select the base circle. Since all of them are parented to it, I can just move it to the center over here. And with this done, we can go ahead and place this word right into the sentence over here. I'll go ahead and just delay it a tiny bit so that this one pops in first and then the word phone does. All right, now while all of this is happening, I want my 3D object, which is going to be a phone, to kind of come into screen from the bottom. So here's exactly how we're going to do this. First, we need a 3D object, which is the phone. So I'm heading over to Sketchfab and I'm basically just going to search up for an iPhone model. All we have to do is go over to price and set this to free so that we could get the free options. So this one over here seems to be a very, very good one. It's also available in GLB, which is what we're looking for, but it's a $1 to $2 phone. So we're going to go ahead and select our $1 license and I'm going to go ahead and buy this. And we're just going to go ahead and download it in the GLB form because that's the one that works best with After Effects. Now, once I have it downloaded, I can just go ahead and drag it straight into After Effects and I'm going to click on Make Comp Size. Let's go ahead and click on OK, and everything is going to be turned into the Advanced 3D Render. Let's first of all expand this and set this to 2 views. And I'm going to set this to the left side just so that I can see, okay, the anchor point is at the bottom of the phone. So if I go ahead and change my final value over here, I can actually move this thing down. Let's make sure that the anchor point is just somewhere at the center. Now let's go ahead and first get started by adding in our custom screen. The best way to do this and the simplest way to do this is to, first of all, let's start by orienting it so that we can see the screen. First, let's go ahead and start by clicking on S and scaling this thing up so that we can see what we're working with. And the easiest way to do this is to right click and add in a new shape layer. And on this shape layer, we're going to use our rectangle tool to basically trace out the entire phone. Now let's go ahead and delete that stroke. And we're just going to make the fill white for now. And we're going to start increasing the roundness until we get the roundness of the screen. And now we're just going to go ahead and click on toggle switches and modes and set this thing to a 3D layer. And just make sure that we place it right on top of our screen. So I'm going to go back to this animation where we have the Ultimate Editor's logo and I'm just going to copy it. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste it right over here. However, I am going to delete all of these keyframes just to make sure that we have a fresh logo. Now I'm going to go ahead and place this thing on the center, kind of like this, and maybe scale it down to something like 20. Next thing that I want is I want some circle waves kind of expanding from the middle. That's going to make up a very, very cool background. So I'm going to go back to the circle waves that we made over here and I'm basically just going to copy all of them. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste them right over here. Now let's go ahead and move them and place them behind our 3D logo and just make sure that we cut it right before the animation finishes. Now I also want to make sure that all of these are aligned to the center. So I'm going to click on P on all of them and just make sure that they all generate from the middle of the Ultimate Editor's logo. I am also going to extend these and just kind of spread them out more, just so that we have some more even waves and we can just cover more time and have more of these waves come out. And we're even going to just duplicate some of them and then place them back up so that we have some even newer circles that come out. And I'm just going to make sure that I end it with this dark blue color over here. We're going to right click and add in a new shape layer. Let's just go ahead and select our ellipse tool, zoom into the top left over here and just create an ellipse like so. Let's make sure that we delete the stroke, and as for the fill, let's go ahead and choose something like a gray color and just tone down the opacity. And now finally, inside of the same shape layer, I'm also going to select our pen tool, and I'm just going to go ahead and zoom in and draw an X like so. And on this specific shape layer, I'm going to go ahead and go down to the stroke, set the stroke width to something like 4 and set the color to white. And I'm just going to go inside that same shape layer and draw another one exactly like it. Now I am going to tone this down to 2 on each one because 4 is very big. And with that done, the second part is the time in the top right. So I'm also going to just duplicate this same shape layer, but this time I'm going to delete all of these shapes inside of it. And instead I'm going to take my rectangle and I'm just going to draw out a flat rectangle over here in the top right. Then we're going to delete its stroke and we're just going to go down to rectangle path and increase the roundness all the way. Then we're changing the fill to this dark kind of gray and just toning down the opacity just like the one before. And finally, we're going to add in the time on this. So we're going to right click and add in a new text layer on top of all this. We're going to double click and we're going to write out something like 12:15. And then all I'm going to do is just go ahead and click on P and bring this thing up to where my rectangle is. We're going to select it, make sure that we're using the light font and make sure that its color is a white. And we're just going to go ahead and scale this thing down and place it right here in the middle of our time zone. Now these don't look the best because we need to do our final touches. So let's go ahead and do this. So let's first of all make the anchor point in the middle. Let's just make it slightly smaller. And we're going to just go ahead and place it in the top left like so. I think the time is definitely too big. So we're going to take the text and we're going to scale it down to something like 45. Let's make sure the anchor point's in the middle. Let's go ahead and place it in the middle like so. Now I'm also going to add in some variation in between the text. This way we can space them out a little bit more. And that should just look much better. Let's go ahead and set the anchor point to the center of this block. And let's go ahead and set the scale to something like 80. And now if we select both of these and just kind of move them to the top right over here, we should be pretty good. Now we're going to go ahead and right click and add in yet another text. This time this one is going to be a bold font. And we're just going to write out the words loading with 3 dots. And we're going to just make sure that we're using a dark gray or a dark black color. Let's go ahead and scale this thing down. And let's just go ahead and place this on top of our logo like so. Let's change the variation so that it's a regular text. And for this one, let's actually use the light font for this specific one and just scale it down to something like 50. Then we're going to duplicate the same exact one, go ahead and use its position to bring it down to the bottom. And we're just going to write out the words Ultimate Editors. And this time we're going to use a bold font. And instead, we're going to be moving this text to the center of the Ultimate Editors logo and simply just moving it up to the top like that. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to track match all of these. So we're going to select all of these except the white shape layer. We're going to click on toggle switches and modes, and we're just going to track matte all of these into our shape layer that we just created. Now the last thing I'm also going to be doing is just making sure that I select this text, and we're going to change this one to a white color, and we're going to change the second one also to a white color. And I'm also going to be applying the deep glow to both of these texts at a very light amount, just to make sure that they do look like text on the screen. The other thing I'm going to be doing is also selecting my Ultimate Editor's logo, and I'm going to right click and add in an adjustment layer on top of that. Let's just make sure that the adjustment layer is right on top of my logo. Then I'm going to add in a deep glow to the adjustment layer and make its exposure 0.2, and then go ahead and pre-compose it with my Ultimate Editor's logo. The last thing that I want to do is make sure that I apply this as an actual screen, because right now it's just a 2D animation. So to do this, I have to select all of these, including that frame, and right click and pre-compose it. The final part of this whole process is making this a 3D layer now and moving the Z axis so that it's just right on top of our phone. Now I'm going to need to play around with this so that it is perfectly aligned with the screen. And now once it is perfectly aligned, all that I have to do is parent this thing to the iPhone. And now that everything is set up, we can finally get to work on our 3D animation. So let's go ahead and do this. I want to actually select my iPhone and click on R, and I want to start this thing rotated at 180 degrees, but I want to just start it flat on the ground. So I'm going to rotate it something like maybe 70 or 80 degrees on the X-axis. Now I basically want to move the Z axis so that it's closer to the screen like that. And I'm just going to start things off by moving its position downwards. And we're just going to like have it come out from the bottom of the screen like so, all the way out like that. Let's go ahead and click on R. Let's just make sure that the X rotation is minus 90 degrees, so it is actually flat. And let's just go ahead and move its Y value down a little bit. And we're going to have this thing start off in the back over here. Let's go ahead and move its Z axis so that it's closer to the camera. And we're just going to move its Y value up until it's very, very, very close, which should be pretty good like so. Now we're going to go ahead and start our movement back over here. So I'll keyframe this current position, and then I'm going to move something like 3 seconds in and just have it kind of fly into the screen like so. Now as this thing flies into the screen, I also want to rotate upwards. So I'm going to go ahead and click on R and keyframe the X, Y, and Z rotation and click on U. Now we're going to move these all the way back so that they start at this angle. And then we're just going to move forward and we're just going to have it kind of angle up. Then we're going to have it rotate a bit on the Y and just give us a minor rotation on the Z. Now we're going to move the second set of keyframes all the way to the end over here so that we have a nice and smooth movement all the way to the end. And I'm also going to continue this animation. I'm going to move the Z axis all the way back, move the Y axis to the top so that it's in the middle of the screen, move the X axis a little bit like so. And we're just going to go ahead and continue this so that we have a pretty cool animation like so. Let's go ahead and bring all of these into the graph. And we're just going to be using the speed graph so that we don't get mixed up. Let's go ahead and F9 this whole thing, make sure it starts slow and make sure it ends slow as well. So I'm going to go ahead and move over to the 30-second mark, and I'm going to do a few things. First of all, on my Z rotation, I want it to rotate all the way back so that we could see that Apple logo. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and change the Y rotation so that it's flat and it takes over the screen. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move the X rotation like that. I'm going to move the Z value all the way until we're fully zoomed in. And I'm just going to move the X value and Y value until we get into the Apple logo. And I'm just going to keep zooming us in all the way until we basically eat the entire Apple logo and the whole screen is gray. So for my position, I'm selecting my position and I'm just going to make sure that this thing ends very quickly and starts very, very slowly. Then for all three of the rotations, we're going to select all of these and we're just going to make sure that they start relatively slowly and also end relatively slowly. We want to do this so that we have a generally pretty smooth movement. Now, this being said, right at the end over here, as we are zooming in, we're zooming into a gray Apple logo. So we need something that transitions from a gray color to a black color. And the best way to do this is to go ahead and go all the way back to the beginning where we had our first background. And I'm just going to basically cut out a section of this background over here. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and place it on top, and I'm going to place it on the top over here at the end. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that this thing fades in from the center like so as this full animation happens. So to do this, we're going to just select an ellipse tool and we're just going to draw an ellipse in the middle like that. And we're going to do a few things to this mask. We're going to go down and we're going to really bump up that feather. Now we're going to start the mask expansion very, very small like this and keyframe it. And we're just going to move to the end and I'm just going to increase the mask expansion until we have a background. So all that we have to do to smoothen this more, we just have to like feather out this mask a bunch more. Now, one last thing we do want to do is we want to make sure that all of this text is on top of our 3D animation. So we're going to select all this text and place these layers on top of our 3D animation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the word phone and move its anchor point to the right side. So it's on the right side of the phone. Then I'm going to select the other words and also use its anchor point to move it to the left side of the phone. Now, what we just covered, guys, is a bunch of 3D things. So this is everything related to 3D objects, 3D movement, and understanding 3D. And you probably have found this very, very difficult if you don't fully understand how 3D works inside of After Effects. So in the case that you guys want to learn how 3D works inside of After Effects, I've actually created a full masterclass on 3D with a bunch of courses covering everything you need to know to create basically these 3D animations. It's all included in the Ultimate Editor's Plan with 300 other video editing courses if you guys want to check it out down below. The final touch that I will do is I will just make sure that I've turned on motion blur, and this is the big thing. This is what makes these animations super smooth. I'm just going to make sure that I toggle motion blur for all of these animations. And ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this entire animation. I hope you guys enjoyed watching me create this whole very, very cool animation. And I know that you guys learned a lot of cool concepts about motion design, motion graphics, even creativity, and how you should think as an editor. If you guys found this useful, I've got 300 more courses just like this one and even better inside of Ultimate Editors, where we take you step by step by the hand and turn you into an amazing editor who can edit videos like these and much more. So this being said, if you guys are interested in becoming amazing editors and making money with video editing, I could personally coach you. You could check it out down in the link below. That being said, guys, thanks a lot for watching. It's always super nice to make some of these tutorials. If you guys are enjoying these longer format tutorials and learning more from them, make sure you let me know down below so I can keep making more. And that being said, if you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe to the channel. God bless all of you guys. I will see you in the next video where we've got another banger lined up. Or in the meantime, you could check out one of these two other tutorials, which are also just as useful as this one if you guys want to keep improving as video editors. See you guys in the next video.